Hello, and welcome to Melody Joy Quilts. I am Melody Joy, and welcome to this little part of the internet where I show the projects that I'm working on, hopefully to inspire you or entertain you or just to share what I've been working on. I have been working on some scrappy potato chip blocks. But today I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to use some fat quarters that I picked up from the International Quilt Festival when it was in Houston. And I got some really beautiful fat quarters there, all different bright, happy colors. And I'm going to cut some strips and then either 2.5 or 4.5 inch strips, and then subcut those down to my preferred potato chip block size, which is 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And I'm going to use these to make some beautiful quilt blocks. For the centers of my blocks, I am going to fussy cut some mermaid fabric. This mermaid fabric is left over from a tote bag I made for my niece. This green print, I'm just realizing, is a Tula Pink print, and it has little foxes on it. It's flowers, and the foxes are very subtle in between the flowers, but it's just such a darling print. This is one of the fat quarters that I picked up from the quilt festival. I had so much fun going and looking at all the quilts and then also doing some shopping. And I'm going to cut some strips off of here and use this to make my quilt blocks. I felt like I was losing some fabric on these fat quarters because when I'm trying to square up the edges, some of the edges were pretty uneven, but I was cutting 2.5 inch strips so that I can subcut those down to 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch. It's probably more efficient to cut multiple layers of fabric all at one time, but a lot of times when I'm quilting, I'm not always going for what is necessarily the fastest, the most efficient, because I really enjoy looking at my fabrics and touching them and seeing them, and I get to know all my different prints, and to me that's part of the fun. So I'm sure that I could do this faster, but I am using 2 strips here, and I'm just kind of lining them up so I can at least do, when I make this one cut on the 4.5 inch line, I'm gonna get multiple blocks. I am using a mix of scraps from my stash and leftover prints from other projects, plus a few 2.5 inch strips off the fat quarters I got from the festival. I think what could also work well for this is if you had leftover jelly roll strips, because you're using 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch blocks. This is 2 pieces I sewed together the other day when I was working on some of these blocks. I think if you had a jelly roll, you could make these potato chip blocks. Here's just some samples of ones I made the other day. And I played around with the different centers, and what I decided I really liked in the center was using a fussy cut shape in the center. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do all of that. This fabric is what I picked up at the festival for the backing, and it's a pink and orange cloud, and I just love it. That's going to be the back of my quilt. These are all the fat quarters that I picked up. There's so many different ones. I'm not going to use all of them in this project, but several of them I will use. This orange print I got at a booth that had $1 fat quarters, and I was so excited to find that sign that said $1 fat quarters with a big arrow, and there was, of course, several ladies all around that looking through. It's a really interesting pattern because it almost looks like a batik, and it has, if you look really closely, kind of like sunrise, sunset, but it also has little fishies, but they're kind of abstract, so it kind of just reads as an abstract print, but if you look up close, there are little fishies on this print. I struggled so much with this fabric because it clearly had a very linear lines, on it. And the way that the original fat quarter had been cut was very off on the lines, and that was really bothering me. So it took me a while to line this one up to get it to where I felt like it was pretty straight. This pink and orange paisley may have been my favorite from the entire, out of all the fabrics I own currently. I think this pink and orange paisley is my very favorite. It actually reminds me of my first college dorm room because my roommate and I had decorated it with pink and orange. And so these just bright, happy colors, it just brings back happy memories. In fact, I liked it so much, instead of doing a 2.5-inch cut, I did a 4.5-inch cut so that when I subcut it, it'll give me more. I'll get more potato chip pieces out of this one. So I just loved it so much. I was like, I definitely want more of this. And because it is pink and orange, it matches that cloud fabric that I got for the back of the quilt. When I decided to take quilting up as a hobby, I don't think I quite realized that 95% of what you do is sorting and cutting fabrics, and the other 95% is ironing, and only about 2 to 5% is actual sewing on the machine. It feels like in any quilting session, I do more cutting and ironing than anything else. I don't know if anyone else feels that way. I think I ended up with a pretty good assortment of colors: purples, teals, oranges, pinks, purples, lavenders. There's a few low volumes, but just a lot of different scrappy colors. And this is going to be a quilt for one of my nieces, so I do kind of want to lean into like the pinks and purples and oranges. Okay, so once we're finally done cutting, it's time to finally get ready to start sewing. So I am going to use those 4.5-inch squares that I fussy cut out of the mermaid fabric. I tried to get one mermaid in each of those 4.5-inch squares as the center of these potato chip blocks. So to either side, I am adding a potato chip piece that's 2.5 by 4.5. And I'm not being like super picky, but I'm just trying to make sure there's a decent amount of contrast. My mermaid fabric has a white background, so I'm choosing not to do a low volume right next to it because I don't think it'll create enough contrast. The other thing that I'm doing is on some of the mermaids, I'm adding the piece of fabric to the side, and on some of them adding it to the top or bottom, because the way this is going to piece out is we're going to add the 1 pieces and then sets of 2 and then sets of 3. And when these potato chip blocks go side by side, you want them to kind of alternate what's on that very far edge. So I am switching it up which way these blocks are going to end up facing. So I like to just audition fabrics. Put a piece of fabric next to it and see if I like it or not, if it's creating enough contrast. And as soon as I'm happy with it, then I just put it right sides together and sew along one side with a 1/4-inch seam. I heard a different quilter say that working on kind of scrappy puzzles, scrappy quilt blocks is like working a puzzle that has multiple right answers. And I thought that was such a good way of describing it, because there's so many different choices you can make, and none of them are necessarily wrong, but just trying to create a level of contrast that you're happy with, and not putting necessarily a white background next to a white background, or a blue next to a blue, or an orange next to an orange, but just kind of mixing it up. And so I like to just put a piece next to it, and if it feels right, then I go with it. If it's not feeling right, then I just keep auditioning pieces. I've seen some quilters also use color wheels to really try to make sure that they're using contrasting colors. I don't really get to that level. I just kind of go with if it feels right or not. One thing I love about these kind of potato chip method of blocks is there is no matching seams, so the ironing is really easy. I just iron everything out, so everything I just iron it away from the center block, and I just keep doing that. Every time we add another border on, I iron it towards the outside because there's never going to be any seams that you have to nest up. The other thing that I really like is that it's really more of a method than a pattern per se. And so once you've finished with the one potato chip on either side of your center block, you're going to sew 2 potato chip blocks together on the short end to create that strip of 2, and then you add a strip of 2 on either side. And so you just keep building it out. These blocks play together really well, and so you don't have to have a set pattern. This is really more of a method. Here you can see I have this strip of 2 that was already sewn together, and I audition it on several of my different quilt blocks before I find one that feels right to me. I try not to overthink the auditioning process, but I do feel like these blocks are going to be very scrappy. And so one thing I'm looking for is to make sure I'm not putting too many of the same fabric in each block. I ran out of sets of 2 that were sewn together, so now I'm just going through my ever-growing pile of potato chips and looking for fun colors to go together. I'm sewing them together on the short side. I'm going to press them open, and then these are going to continue to be borders around the edge of my quilt block. These quilt blocks will end up finishing at 12.5 inches. This is a great scrap buster quilt if you have a lot of fabrics in your stash, especially if you already have some that are cut into jelly rolls, because you are needing the 2.5 by 4.5 inch. I think this would make a really fun I Spy quilt because you can change out the centers of your block with any 4.5 inch square. And so I think you could just have a lot of fun with this. I'm definitely making this quilt for a child who is currently 5 years old, and I feel like it's a really age appropriate pattern. I just think it's so fun. And then adding the mermaids in the center of the block, I think just kind of adds to the whimsy. I just cut all of my chain pieces apart with scissors. I have seen some quilters have those cute little flower looking stands that have a blade in between the petals, and they can kind of just really quickly cut their threads on those. I don't have one of those yet, but it's on my wish list. I am just pressing to set my seam, and then I'm pressing the seam open towards the outside. And so on all of these blocks, I just continue to press away from the center, and there's no nesting seams, so it doesn't matter. It just seems easiest to me to press it this way, and then I'm consistent. You can be as free-spirited or as planned as you want with your color placements. I'm clearly a free spirit when I'm quilting and just kind of grab whatever looks right, but you could also plan this out. And I saw someone do a potato chip block where they used one whole fabric line. So if you did have a jelly roll and you cut all your pieces out of that, it would definitely coordinate more and be more cohesive, whereas mine is very random and scrappy and lots of different fabric lines and designers. This is more of a method than a pattern, but what I try to tell myself when I'm adding the strips on the next side is there should never be any nesting seams. So if you're putting a piece on and a seam is matching up with another seam, then you have it on the wrong side. And so you need to go to the next side of the block, because it should always be kind of a brick pattern where everything is offset. So if you are running into where your seam is matching up with your other seam, then you're on the wrong side of your block. This is kind of what I'm telling myself to make sure that I'm always adding the strip on the right side. The last time I sat down to work on this quilt, I was only doing one quilt block at a time. Someone suggested in the comments that I should probably do more than one at one time because it'd be more efficient. And this time I did 5 at one time. And so I just kept adding strips on to 5 blocks at a time, and then I would iron them out and then do it. I liked this amount. This seemed to be a nice flow. For me, 5. I don't know. You could probably do all the blocks for your entire quilt all at one time, but this was a nice pace for me, and it was a nice afternoon of sewing. And these blocks were so fun. I caught myself just smiling sometimes when I was looking at the prints because they're all just so darling, and it's just making me happy, and my little inner child is just delighted with all my fabric choices. So we started with a 4.5-inch square, and we added one 2.5 by 4.5-inch strip to 2 sides. And then we sewed 2 strips together, and we added a set of 2 to 2 sides. Now we need another 2 sets of 2, and we're going to sew those on the opposite sides. And again, we're not nesting any seams, so whatever, it's going to be opposite of the side we just did. But I need a few more sets of 2. So I'm just going back through and grabbing colors that I like together. Pulling a long chain of pieces off the back of my quilt just never gets old. It's always fun. It's almost like a little string of pennants, and it's just very satisfying. Quilting often feels like 90% ironing to me, but we're done ironing those. So now we're going to go back to adding the strips. And again, you're going for the side that doesn't match. So not the side that you sewed the 2 pieces on already. Go on the opposite side. Lay it right sides together, 1/4 inch seam. And all I'm looking for right now is that I'm not having same colors touching same. Just trying to add a good mix of color and, intensity, whether it's more darker colors or lighter colors, trying to kind of mix it up a little bit. Here I ran into the issue that this rainbow print was already in this block. And so I'm trying to not put multiples, at least not more than 2 of the same fabric in the same block, or at least not right next to each other. If it's like far enough on the opposite side of the block, then it might look balanced, but I'm really trying to go for a scrappy look here. I think this is so cute. Okay, we are now done with all the sets of 2. We now need to make some sets of 3 potato chip blocks sewn end to end to end, and so that we can add our last 2 strips on the top and bottom of our blocks. And so I already have these sets of 2, so I'm now just going to try to grab a 3rd color that's not in that set of 2 and make sets of 3. And we're almost to the end of these blocks. Have you tried potato chip blocks? Do you like them? Do you find them fun? Do you make them scrappy? Do you make them cohesive? I'd love to know. And I'd love to know if you use a different size. I'm using 2.5 by 4.5, but I've seen tutorials where people are using much smaller pieces, like 1 by 3 or larger ones. And so let me know if you've made this style block before and what size pieces you used. I'm just curious. And thank you for watching. Okay, we're down to the end. We're adding our sets of 3 on. Now, there should be only one side that this matches on. Earlier with the sets of 2, you kind of had to pay attention to which side you were putting it on because it technically would fit on multiple sides, but there was only one correct side to put it on. But on this set of 3, it's only going to fit lengthwise on one side, so it makes it a little easier. So this would have put 3 of the same color in the same block, so I didn't like that one. So just continuing with the auditioning process. Okay, so this is a finished block, and it's 16 potato chips, and they are all surrounding that 4.5-inch center. And each block is finishing to a 12.5-inch square. And I have that fun little mermaid print right in the middle. And you can see that around the center square, there's one piece on either side, and then it's a set of 2 on top and bottom, a set of 2 on the sides, and a set of 3 on top and bottom. Here's a little close-up of how it's looking when I lay them all out. There's little puppy dogs, little mermaids. Oh, I just love this so much. There's a little red-headed mermaid with her little seahorse. I just think this is so darling. It's like a little I Spy quilt. They all just look so happy and so many bright, fun colors. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, hit the hype button, and join me for more quilting fun. Happy quilting!